My name is Rachel Mitchell, and I'm 31 years old. For 5 years, I've been a dedicated pharmacy technician at MediRite drugstore, never missing a shift, always arriving early. That changed with one phone call. My mom, sobbing, told me Dad had a massive heart attack. I needed to fly across the country immediately. When I told my manager Brandon I needed emergency leave, his cold eyes narrowed. Not my problem. Cover your shift or you're fired. I took the week off anyway. When I came back, everything had changed. Before I continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let me know if you've ever had to choose between family and work. Dad and I always had a special bond. Frank Mitchell was the kind of father who never missed a softball game or school play. When Mom died early from breast cancer when I was just 15, Dad somehow managed to be both parents to me. He worked extra shifts at the construction company to make sure I had everything I needed, especially for college. I remember him falling asleep at the kitchen table after 16-hour days, still in his work boots, bills spread out in front of him. Despite everything, he never complained. Every Sunday without fail, even after I moved 2 states away to start my pharmacy career, he'd call me. Just checking on my little girl, he'd say, though I was well into my 30s. Those calls were my anchor. MediRite drugstore seemed like a dream job at first. I enjoyed helping patients, and the healthcare benefits were decent. The previous manager, Gloria, had created a supportive environment where we functioned like a family. That all changed 8 months ago when corporate sent Brandon Wilson to replace Gloria after her retirement. Brandon was 35, wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in our small pharmacy, and had an MBA he mentioned in virtually every conversation. He'd never actually worked in a pharmacy before, but had extensive retail management experience, according to the introduction email. From day one, he made it clear that metrics and corporate targets were his only concern. Your customer satisfaction scores are irrelevant if prescription throughput is below target, he announced in his first staff meeting. The warm, patient-centered approach Gloria had cultivated quickly eroded under his leadership. Heather Adams was my closest ally at work. In her 50s with grown children, she had a maternal approach to both patients and coworkers. She'd been at MediRite even longer than me, but her conflict-avoidant nature meant she rarely challenged Brandon directly. Just keep your head down, she'd whisper when Brandon implemented another unreasonable policy. This too shall pass. The HR representative, Stephanie Davis, was technically supposed to be our advocate, but she operated more like Brandon's personal assistant. A corporate rule follower to the core. She'd respond to any concern with, according to company policy section 4.3, rather than addressing the human element of any situation. Our pharmacy was chronically understaffed, with 3 people doing the work of 5 most days. Corporate kept promising additional help but never delivered. This meant 14-hour shifts were common, breaks were rare, and the pressure to keep the prescription queue moving was intense. Despite this, I maintained my dedication to the job. Patients relied on us, and many knew me by name after 5 years of service. The day before everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at 7:30 a.m. to prep the pharmacy before our 8 a.m. opening. Brandon was already there, reviewing yesterday's metrics with a dissatisfied expression. Rachel, your verification rate was 2 minutes slower than target yesterday, he said without looking up from his tablet. We had that rush of flu prescriptions, and Mrs. Henderson needed. Excuses don't change numbers, he interrupted. Do better today. The morning was unusually chaotic. A local doctor's office had a computer glitch that sent 3 days' worth of prescriptions to us simultaneously. The phone rang constantly, the drive-through line stretched around the building, and the in-store pickup counter had a line 10 people deep. Heather called in because her son had a fever, leaving just me, Brandon, who rarely helped with actual pharmacy work, and our new pharmacy intern, Tyler. By 6 p.m., my feet were throbbing, I hadn't taken a single break, and we still had over 50 prescriptions in the queue. Brandon emerged from his office, where he'd been on a conference call most of the afternoon. I need to leave for my dinner reservation, he announced. Make sure all these orders are finished before closing. Brandon, that's impossible with just me and Tyler, I protested. We need help, or we need to tell patients there will be delays. Figure it out, Rachel. That's what I pay you for. He straightened his tie and walked out, leaving us drowning in work. Somehow, Tyler and I managed to get through most of the queue, calling patients about inevitable delays and weathering their understandable frustration. I finally locked up at 10:30 p.m., 2.5 hours after my shift was supposed to end. Exhausted, I trudged to my car in the dark parking lot. When I checked my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from my mother, which was unusual. My stomach immediately tightened with worry. Mom rarely called once, let alone 3 times, unless something was seriously wrong. I called her back with shaking hands as I sat in my car. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something terrible had happened. She was barely coherent through her sobs. Rachel, it's Dad. He collapsed at work. Heart attack. It's bad, really bad. The doctors. She broke down again. They don't think he's going to make it. You need to come now. My world stopped spinning in that moment. Dad. My rock. The man who had always been there for me. I couldn't process the information. Not Dad. Not my invincible father who still did construction work at 62. Which hospital? I managed to ask, already starting my car. I'm coming right now. Memorial Regional. The cardiac ICU. Mom's voice sounded distant, hollow. Please hurry, Rachel. I don't think there's much time. As I drove home to quickly pack a bag, my mind raced. I needed to book a flight immediately. I needed to tell work I wouldn't be coming in. I needed to be with my father before it was too late. Little did I know that the crisis at home was about to be compounded by a crisis at work that would change everything. The flight from Denver to Boston would take at least 4 hours, not counting layovers. The earliest direct flight wasn't until 10 a.m. the next day, but I found a red-eye with a connection through Chicago that would get me there by 7 a.m. It cost nearly $900, money I didn't really have, but that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except getting to Dad. With my hands still shaking, I called Brandon. Despite the late hour, I knew he was still up because he'd posted about his fancy business dinner on social media just 20 minutes earlier. He answered on the 4th ring. This better be important, he said instead of hello. Brandon, I have a family emergency, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I threw clothes into a suitcase. My father had a severe heart attack. I need to fly to Boston immediately. The doctors don't think he's going to make it. There was a pause, and I naively thought he might be processing this information with compassion. We're already short-staffed tomorrow, he finally said. Heather's kid is still sick. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Brandon, my father is dying. I have to go. Rachel. Everyone has problems, he said with an audible sigh. I need you here tomorrow. We have that senior care facility order coming in. Tears welled in my eyes as anger rose in my chest. This isn't just a problem. This is my father's life. Look, I sympathize, but the pharmacy can't function without you tomorrow. Not my problem. Cover your shift or you're fired. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a minor scheduling inconvenience. You can't be serious, I said, my voice breaking. This is an emergency family leave situation. Find someone to cover your shifts for the rest of the week, or don't bother coming back, he said before hanging up. I stood in my bedroom, phone in hand, completely stunned. I knew Brandon was callous, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I immediately started calling coworkers, desperate to find coverage. Most didn't answer given the late hour. Tyler, our intern, couldn't legally cover my shifts alone. The few who did pick up expressed sympathy but had their own commitments. I tried Heather next, even though I knew her son was sick. Oh, Rachel. I'm so sorry about your dad, she said, genuine concern in her voice. I would cover for you in a heartbeat, but Jacob has a 103-degree fever. I can't leave him. I understand, I assured her. Take care of your boy. By midnight, I had exhausted every possibility and had no coverage. I called Brandon again, who sent me straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation. then sent a formal email documenting my emergency leave request, copying Stephanie from HR. I managed a few hours of fitful sleep before my 4 a.m. alarm. Before heading to the airport, I made one last attempt to resolve the situation, stopping by the pharmacy at 5 a.m. when I knew Brandon would be doing inventory. He barely looked up when I entered. "Did you find coverage?" "No." "But Brandon, this is a legitimate family emergency. Company policy allows for." "I know the policy," he snapped. "It also states, subject to operational requirements. We are critically understaffed. I can't approve your leave." "My father is dying," I said, my voice rising. "I'm not asking for permission at this point. I'm informing you that I need to be with my family during this crisis." Brandon finally looked at me, his expression cold. "Make your choice, Rachel. Your job or your family drama. Not my problem either way." Something broke inside me at that moment. "There's no choice to make," I said quietly. "I'll be on a plane in 2 hours. Then don't expect your job to be waiting when you get back." I turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I've documented everything, Brandon. Check your email. I've also sent copies to HR and district management." It was a small act of defiance, but it felt necessary. On my way to the airport, I called Stephanie from HR, hoping for some support. She answered with her typical professional detachment. "Rachel, while I understand your situation is difficult, Brandon is correct that staffing requirements can override emergency leave requests. Perhaps you could delay your trip by a day or two until coverage can be arranged." "The doctors don't think my father will live through the day," I said bluntly. "There is no delay option." "I see," she said, sounding uncomfortable. "Well, I'll make a note in your file about the circumstances." That's really all I can do. As I sat at the gate waiting to board my flight, I checked the employee handbook on my phone. Under Emergency Family Leave, it clearly stated that employees were entitled to up to 5 days of leave for immediate family medical emergencies, with additional unpaid leave available for bereavement. There was indeed a clause about operational requirements, but it also stated that management will make every reasonable effort to accommodate emergency situations. Nothing about Brandon's response had been reasonable. I forwarded the policy to my personal email, shut off my work notifications, and boarded the plane with a strange mix of grief, anxiety, and determination. As the plane took off, I made my choice. Whatever happened with my job, I would not regret being with my father in his final moments. Some things were more important than a paycheck. The flight to Chicago was a blur. I stared out the window at the darkness, my mind racing between worry for my father and anger at Brandon. During my short layover, I called my mother for an update. "He's still hanging on," she said, her voice raw from crying. "The doctors are surprised he made it through the night, but they're not optimistic, Rachel. His heart is severely damaged." "I'm on my way, Mom. Just 2 more hours." I tried to sound stronger than I felt. "Please hurry." The second flight felt endless. I clutched my armrests during takeoff, silently pleading with the universe to let me reach Dad in time. The middle-aged woman next to me must have sensed my distress. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked gently. Before I knew it, I was telling this stranger everything. About Dad's heart attack, about Brandon's ultimatum, about my fear of arriving too late. She held my hand during turbulence and shared stories of losing her own father years earlier. "You're doing the right thing," she assured me as we began our descent. "Jobs come and go, but these moments with family, you can't get those back." I took a ridiculously expensive airport taxi to Memorial Regional, my heart pounding as we navigated morning traffic. I practically ran through the hospital entrance, following signs to the cardiac ICU. The antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting made everything feel surreal. At the nurse's station, I breathlessly identified myself. The nurse's expression softened immediately, never a good sign. "Your family is with him now," she said, leading me to his room. "He's been asking for you." Nothing could have prepared me for seeing my strong, vital father reduced to the frail figure in the hospital bed. Tubes and wires connected him to various machines, their steady beeping the only indication that he was still with us. Mom sat beside him, holding his hand, while my sister Emma and brother Michael stood on the other side of the bed. Emma saw me first, her face crumpling as she rushed to embrace me. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. "It's been touch and go all night." Michael, always the stoic one, simply nodded, his red-rimmed eyes betraying his emotion. "He's been waiting for you." Mom looked up, her face aged 10 years overnight. "Rachel," she said, her voice breaking. She didn't need to say more. I approached the bed cautiously, almost afraid to see Dad up close. His skin had a grayish tint, his breathing labored despite the oxygen mask. But when he opened his eyes and saw me, they still held that special sparkle reserved just for his little girl. "Dad," I said, taking his hand carefully around the 4 lines. "I'm here now." He tried to speak, but couldn't manage more than a whisper. I leaned closer. "You came," he breathed, a ghost of his usual smile appearing. "Of course I came. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." I squeezed his hand gently. The doctor arrived shortly after, taking us into a small consultation room. Dr. Abernathy was direct, but kind as he explained Dad's condition. The heart attack was massive and caused significant damage. "We've done everything medically possible, but his heart is simply too weak. Multiple organs are beginning to fail." He paused, allowing us to process this information. "At this point, our goal is to keep him comfortable." "I'm very sorry, but you should prepare yourselves. It could be hours or days, but the outcome is inevitable." Emma broke down while Michael put his arm around Mom, who seemed to physically shrink with each word. I remained oddly calm, asking questions about pain management and what to expect, storing information to share with the family later when they could absorb it. We returned to Dad's room to find a nurse adjusting his medication. "He's resting more comfortably now," she assured us. The next 12 hours passed in a strange rhythm of hospital time, both excruciatingly slow and alarmingly fast. We took turns sitting with Dad, sharing memories, holding his hand. During a brief moment alone with him, he rallied enough to have a semi-lucid conversation. "Remember the fishing trip, when you were 10? He asked between labored breaths. I smiled through tears. "When I fell in the lake and you jumped in with your boots still on?" He nodded slightly. "Never been so scared, thought I'd lost you. You saved me." I reminded him, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Always tried to protect you." His eyes drifted to the window. "Not going to be able to do that anymore. You taught me to be strong. Dad, you gave me everything I needed." I leaned forward to kiss his forehead. "It's okay to rest now." His eyes found mine again. "Your job? What happened?" Even now, he was worried about me. "Don't worry about that. Being here with you is all that matters." "Always so stubborn," he whispered with the faintest smile. "Like me." I felt my phone vibrating repeatedly in my pocket but ignored it. Nothing outside this room mattered right now. Later, while Emma sat with Dad, I checked my messages. 6 missed calls from Brandon, 4 from Stephanie, and a formal email stating I was being terminated for job abandonment. There were also several supportive texts from coworkers who had heard what happened. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, noticing my expression. "Just work drama. Nothing important." "That jackass manager fired you, didn't he?" Michael had always been perceptive. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Apparently showing up for our dying father constitutes job abandonment." Michael's face hardened. "That's wrongful termination. I know a good labor attorney." "Not now, Mike," I interrupted gently. "I can't think about that right now." Emma emerged from Dad's room, her face grave. "He's asking for all of us." We gathered around his bed as his breathing became more irregular. The monitors told the story the doctor had prepared us for. Dad was slipping away. We each said our goodbyes, told him how much we loved him, assured him it was okay to let go. Mom, who had been his high school sweetheart and wife of 40 years, leaned close to his ear. "Frank Mitchell, you wait for me on the other side, you hear me? But take your time. I've got some living to do first, just like you'd want." Dad's eyes opened one last time, scanning our faces as if memorizing them. He tried to speak but couldn't. Instead, he squeezed Mom's hand weakly. The monitor's steady beeping gradually slowed, and then, at 2:17 a.m., it flatlined. The sound of my mother's sob will stay with me forever. There's a strange clarity that comes in the moments after someone you love dies. While Mom collapsed into Emma's arms and Michael stepped into the hallway to compose himself, I found myself noticing odd details. The half-empty water cup on Dad's tray, his reading glasses folded neatly on the side table, one slipper peeking out from under the bed. The doctor arrived to officially pronounce him dead, speaking softly about natural causes and peaceful passing. Words that seemed wholly inadequate to describe what had just happened. The nurse gently asked if we wanted time alone with him before they took him away. We did. Those final moments with Dad's body, not Dad anymore, but the vessel that had carried his spirit, were both heartbreaking and strangely healing. I adjusted his hospital gown, smoothed his hair the way he liked it, and whispered one final "I love you" in his ear. As the oldest sibling, Michael took charge of the practical matters, speaking with the hospital administrator about next steps. Contacting the funeral home Dad had prepaid years ago. "Don't want to burden you kids when the time comes," he'd said, gathering Dad's few belongings from the room. Emma stayed with Mom, who seemed to have aged a decade overnight. I found myself in the strange position of being both devastated and oddly functional. Perhaps it was shock. Or perhaps it was Dad's pragmatic spirit living on through me, but I handled the paperwork, made coffee runs, and fielded calls from relatives while my siblings attended to more emotional tasks. Back at Dad's house, still Dad's house even though he would never return to it, we sat around the kitchen table at 5 a.m., shell-shocked and exhausted. The coffee pot gurgled in the background, a mundane sound in a world that had irrevocably changed. "He was supposed to walk me down the aisle next spring," Emma said suddenly, tears streaming down her face. Her fiancé, Trevor, had been texting constantly, offering to fly out immediately, but she'd asked him to wait until the funeral. "He'll still be there," Mom said, reaching for her hand. "Just not the way we planned." While they talked, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. 27 new emails, most from work. I opened one from Stephanie, HR's robotic representative. "Dear Rachel, this email serves as formal notification of termination due to job abandonment as defined in Section 5.2 of the Employee Handbook. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file within 14 business days. Any company property must be returned within 72 hours. Regards, Stephanie Davis, Human Resources." No condolences. No acknowledgement of the circumstances. Just corporate policy, cold and impersonal. Emma glanced over my shoulder and gasped. "Are you kidding me? They fired you for being with Dad when he died? That's illegal." "It's certainly unethical," Michael said, his attorney mindset kicking in despite his grief. "Rachel, you should fight this. Wrongful termination. Violation of family leave policies, possibly ADA violations since they knew it was a medical emergency." "I can't think about that right now," I said, closing my email app. "We need to focus on Dad and Mom." The next few days passed in the strange time warp that follows a death. Relatives arrived, bringing casseroles and sharing stories about Dad. We met with Pastor Stevens at Dad's church to plan the service. I found Dad's suit, the one he'd worn to Emma's college graduation, and brought it to the funeral home. Mom insisted on ironing his dress shirt herself, a final act of care for her husband. During a rare quiet moment, I checked my work emails again. Beyond the termination notice, there were messages from coworkers expressing shock and sympathy. "Rachel, I'm horrified by what happened," Heather wrote. "Many of us have complained to district management. This isn't right." Tyler, our pharmacy intern, wrote, "Brandon told everyone you quit without notice. When I mentioned your dad, he said we shouldn't discuss former employees' personal problems. People are furious." Most surprising was a message from Janet Foster, the district pharmacy supervisor who rarely visited our location. "Rachel, I've been made aware of the circumstances surrounding your emergency leave and subsequent termination. Please contact me when you're able. This situation requires further review. My sincere condolences for your loss." I forwarded these messages to my personal email but couldn't summon the energy to respond. The funeral was tomorrow and nothing else seemed important. Dad's service was exactly what he would have wanted: simple, meaningful, not too fussy. The church was packed with friends, coworkers, and even families from the Habitat for Humanity projects he'd volunteered with over the years. A gruff construction foreman broke down describing how Dad had mentored dozens of young workers. 3 different neighbors spoke about times Dad had helped them during snowstorms or power outages. Frank never wanted recognition, Pastor Stevens said. He just saw what needed doing and did it. No complaints, no expectation of thanks. I delivered a eulogy that somehow captured both Dad's practical nature and his enormous heart. Standing at the podium, looking at all the lives he had touched, I realized something important. Dad had never defined himself by his job. He worked hard, yes, but his legacy was in his relationships, his integrity, his willingness to help others. It made my situation at MediRite seem suddenly small and unimportant. After the burial, we returned to Dad's house for the reception. As relatives began to leave, promising to check on Mom regularly, I found myself sitting on the back porch steps, Dad's favorite thinking spot. Michael joined me, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "I know you don't want to talk about the job situation yet," he said, passing me a mug, "but when you're ready, I've spoken with Jessica. She's a labor attorney in my firm. Specializes in wrongful termination. She says you have a solid case." I sipped the coffee, considering. What would Dad say? Michael smiled sadly. He'd say, "Stand up for what's right, Reiki. But make sure the fight is worth your peace of mind." That sounded exactly like Dad. "I'm going back tomorrow," I decided. "I need to face this head on. Want me to come with you?" "I can delay my flight." I shook my head. "This is something I need to do myself." "But thanks, big brother." That night, I helped Mom sort through some of Dad's things. We found his wallet, still containing the small school photo of me he'd carried since I was 8. On the back, in his neat handwriting, "My Rachel, braver than she knows." It felt like a message from beyond, a final encouragement from the man who had always believed in me. Tomorrow, I would need that bravery to face whatever waited at MediRite. The flight home felt different than the panicked journey out. Grief had settled into a dull ache in my chest, but alongside it was a new sense of resolve. Dad had faced countless challenges with quiet dignity and unwavering principles. I would do the same. Landing in Denver, I checked into a hotel instead of going straight home. I needed space to prepare for tomorrow's confrontation. Sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed, I spread out all my documentation, the employee handbook with highlighted sections on emergency leave, printouts of emails requesting time off, screenshots of texts from Brandon, the formal termination notice. I also had something unexpected, a voicemail from Heather that I hadn't noticed until now. "Rachel, I've documented everything Brandon said about your situation. The way he handled this was completely against policy. Several of us have filed complaints with district. Call me when you can. And Rachel, I'm so sorry about your dad." I called Jessica, the labor attorney Michael had mentioned. After explaining my situation, she was unequivocal. "This is a textbook wrongful termination case," she said. "Emergency family medical leave is protected under both company policy and state law. The fact that your manager explicitly denied leave for your father's death makes this particularly egregious. Forward me all your documentation, and I'll prepare a letter outlining the legal violations." "I want to try speaking with district management first," I explained. "Litigation would be a last resort." "Understandable. But have the legal groundwork ready. Go in prepared for either outcome." I spent the evening reviewing company policies and relevant employment laws, then drafting what I would say. By morning, I felt as ready as I could be. I arrived at MediRite shortly after opening, dressed in a simple black dress, partly out of respect for Dad, partly because it projected the serious professionalism I needed today. Through the front windows, I could see Heather at the pickup counter, Tyler stocking shelves, and Brandon at the consultation desk, tablet in hand as usual. The bell chimed as I entered. Heather spotted me first, her eyes widening. She hurried over, embracing me tightly. "Rachel, I'm so sorry about your father," she whispered. "We've all been so worried about you." Tyler joined us, offering awkward but sincere condolences. Other employees stopped what they were doing, creating a small gathering of support that I hadn't expected. It was touching and bolstering. Brandon finally looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder as he approached. "Rachel, you're no longer employed here. I need you to leave immediately." His voice carried through the pharmacy, causing customers to turn and stare. "Actually, Brandon, we need to discuss my wrongful termination," I said calmly. "Perhaps somewhere private would be appropriate." "There's nothing to discuss. You abandoned your position during a critical staffing shortage after being explicitly told. After being explicitly told that my dying father wasn't your problem." I interrupted, my voice level but firm. "Yes, let's discuss that. Along with the company's emergency leave policy that you violated." A few customers gasped. An elderly woman at the pickup counter shook her head disapprovingly at Brandon. Brandon's face flushed. "My office. Now." As I followed him, Heather squeezed my arm supportively. "District manager is here today," she whispered. "Third floor." Brandon's office was exactly as I remembered, meticulously organized, with motivational posters about excellence and commitment that now seemed darkly ironic. He closed the door and turned to me. "This dramatic display won't change anything, Rachel. You chose to abandon your position." "I chose to be with my father when he died," I corrected, after properly requesting emergency family leave as outlined in company policy. I placed the highlighted handbook on his desk. Section 7.3 clearly states employees are entitled to emergency leave for immediate family medical crises, subject to operational requirements. He countered. "We were understaffed. The policy also states management will make every reasonable effort to accommodate such requests." Telling me not my problem and threatening termination if I attended to my dying father hardly constitutes reasonable effort. I placed my folder of documentation on his desk. "I have everything, Brandon. The texts, the emails, the witnesses who heard you say my father's death wasn't your problem. I've consulted with legal counsel who confirms this is wrongful termination." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Brandon's face. "You're bluffing. Shall we take this to Daniel Thompson?" I suggested, referring to the district manager. "I believe he's in the building today." Brandon's expression hardened again. "This is a waste of time. I made a business decision based on staffing needs." "Then you won't mind explaining that business decision to Mr. Thompson and the labor board," I said, gathering my documentation. "I'll just head upstairs now." "Wait," Brandon snapped, reaching for his phone. "Fine. We'll involve Thompson." 10 minutes later, we sat in Daniel Thompson's temporary office on the 3rd floor. In his 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses, Thompson had the air of someone who had worked his way up through the company rather than arriving with an MBA. "Ms. Mitchell, I was very sorry to hear about your father," he began, surprising me with his humanity. "Please accept my condolences on behalf of MediRite." "Thank you," I said, unexpectedly touched by this simple acknowledgement that had been so lacking from Brandon and Stephanie. "Now, I understand there's a situation regarding your emergency leave request and subsequent termination. I'd like to hear both sides." I explained the sequence of events factually, without emotional embellishment, presenting my documentation as I went. Brandon frequently interrupted to justify his decisions based on operational requirements and my history of requesting inconvenient time off. Ms. Mitchell had requested 2 personal days in the previous month, he emphasized. The pharmacy was already operating at minimum staffing levels. "Those 2 days were for my annual physical and a dental procedure," I clarified. Both scheduled weeks in advance and approved by Brandon himself. Thompson reviewed the documentation carefully, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Brandon, is it true you told Ms. Mitchell her father's medical emergency was not your problem?" Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "That's taken out of context. I meant staffing the pharmacy wasn't her problem to solve." A knock at the door interrupted us. Heather stood there, looking nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Thompson, but I heard you're discussing Rachel's termination. I have information that's relevant." Thompson invited her in. Brandon's face darkened. "Heather, this doesn't concern you." Actually, it does, she replied with uncharacteristic firmness. I was on speakerphone with Rachel when you told her to choose between her job and her dying father. I heard everything. And it's not just me. Tyler overheard you telling the staff that Rachel had quit without notice when you knew she was at her father's deathbed. Brandon's face reddened. This is ridiculous. She's obviously coordinated with her friends to fabricate. I have the phone records, Heather interrupted, placing a printout on Thompson's desk. And 4 other staff members have signed statements about what happened after Rachel left. Thompson studied the new evidence, then looked at Brandon with undisguised disappointment. Did you consult HR before terminating Ms. Mitchell? Stephanie Davis supported my decision, Brandon insisted. After you told her what exactly? Thompson pressed. Before Brandon could answer, Tyler appeared at the door with Stephanie from HR. Mr. Thompson, I was told you needed to see me regarding Rachel Mitchell's termination. Stephanie looked confused, clearly summoned by someone other than Brandon. Perfect timing, Thompson said. Ms. Davis, did you approve Ms. Mitchell's termination for taking emergency leave to be with her dying father? Stephanie blanched. That's not how the situation was presented to me. I was told Ms. Mitchell had abandoned her position without explanation beyond a family issue and wasn't responding to communications. I pulled out my phone, showing the email I'd sent Stephanie clearly explaining my father's critical condition. I copied you on this before I left. Stephanie's professional composure cracked. I never received this. I would never have approved termination for a bereavement situation. All eyes turned to Brandon, whose confident demeanor had completely dissolved. There must have been a technical issue with the email, he muttered unconvincingly. Thompson's expression was stone cold. Brandon, wait outside please. I need to speak with these ladies privately. After Brandon left, Thompson turned to me. Ms. Mitchell, on behalf of MediRight, I apologize for this inexcusable situation. Your termination is immediately rescinded, with full back pay and benefits. Additionally, you're entitled to bereavement leave, which should have been granted automatically. He turned to Stephanie. Ms. Davis, I'm deeply concerned about the HR protocols that allowed this to happen. We'll need to review all terminations processed under Mr. Wilson's management. Of course, sir. I'll begin immediately. Stephanie looked genuinely disturbed by what she'd learned. Thompson addressed me again. Ms. Mitchell, I understand if you no longer wish to work for MediRight after this experience. However, if you're willing to return, I can assure you Mr. Wilson will no longer be your supervisor. I hadn't expected this outcome. Part of me wanted to walk away from MediRight forever. But another part, the practical voice that sounded suspiciously like Dad, reminded me that good jobs with benefits weren't easy to find. I need some time to consider my options. I said honestly. Of course. Take all the time you need. Your position will remain open. As I left the office, I passed Brandon sitting rigidly in the waiting area, staring straight ahead. Our eyes met briefly, but he quickly looked away. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion and the ongoing weight of grief. I had stood up for myself as Dad would have wanted, but the victory felt hollow without him here to witness it. The following day, I received an official email from Daniel Thompson confirming my reinstatement, back pay, and accumulated bereavement leave. It also mentioned that personnel changes had been implemented to ensure such a situation would never happen again, corporate speak for Brandon's removal. Heather called that evening, unable to contain her news. Brandon's gone. They escorted him out this afternoon. Janet Foster from District is serving as interim manager until they find a permanent replacement. That was fast, I remarked, surprised by this swift action. Apparently yours wasn't the only complaint. Once people realized District was actually listening, everyone came forward with stories. It was like a dam breaking. She paused. When are you coming back? I'm not sure I am, I admitted. I'm still processing everything. I understand, she said gently. But just so you know, everyone here misses you. It's not the same without you. The next morning, a formal letter arrived via courier, an official apology from MediRight's regional director, acknowledging the mishandling of my emergency leave request and the inappropriate termination. It expressed condolences for my father's passing and outlined additional compensation being offered in recognition of the distress caused during an already difficult time. The amount was substantial, nearly 3 months' salary. Stephanie from HR called later that day, her usually detached tone replaced with genuine remorse. "Rachel, I want to personally apologize. I should have investigated more thoroughly before processing your termination. There's no excuse for my failure to follow up. You were working with the information Brandon gave you," I said, finding it easier to be generous now that justice had been served. "That's no excuse. HR's purpose is to protect employees as well as the company. I failed at that." She hesitated. "District is implementing new emergency leave protocols because of your case. Direct approval from HR will now be required for any leave denial." It was something, at least, a small positive change from a terrible situation. My first day back at MediRite came after 2 weeks of bereavement leave. I'd ultimately decided to return, partly for financial stability and partly because walking away felt like letting Brandon win somehow. The pharmacy looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Janet Foster, our interim manager, greeted me with a warm handshake. In her late 50s with practical experience as a pharmacist, she was Brandon's opposite in every way. "Rachel, welcome back. Take today as easy as you need to. We're all just glad to have you here." Coworkers stopped by throughout the day to express condolences and support. Many shared stories of times their own family emergencies had been mishandled by Brandon. Tyler admitted he'd been afraid to request time off for his mother's surgery, rescheduling it twice to accommodate Brandon's demands. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said. "Maybe if enough of us had complained." "Don't blame yourself," I assured him. "The system was designed to make us all feel powerless." The most surprising visit came from a regular customer, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had witnessed my confrontation with Brandon. "I heard about your father, dear," she said, patting my hand across the counter. "My Henry passed 3 years ago. It gets easier, but it never gets easy." She slipped me a small card. "Our grief support group meets Thursdays at the community center. Sometimes it helps to talk with people who understand." A week into my return, Janet called me into the office, Brandon's old space, now transformed with plants and family photos where his motivational posters had once hung. "Rachel, I wanted to discuss something with you. The district is restructuring our management approach, focusing more on pharmaceutical expertise rather than just business metrics." She smiled. "We're creating a new position, lead pharmacy technician, with a substantial pay increase and more humane scheduling. Given your experience and the respect you have from colleagues, I'd like to recommend you for the role." I was stunned. "I appreciate that, but I've only been back a week." "Sometimes difficulties reveal character," Janet said simply. "Think about it. The formal posting will go up next week." That evening, I called Mom to share the news. She was still deep in grief, but making small steps forward each day. "Dad would be so proud of you," she said, her voice stronger than it had been since the funeral. "Standing up for yourself, not letting that awful manager intimidate you." "I learned from the best," I replied, smiling through sudden tears. "How are you doing really, Mom?" "Taking it day by day. Your sister visits daily. Michael calls every night. The neighbors bring more casseroles than I could eat in a lifetime." She paused. "I'm thinking about volunteering at the hospital. Frank always said I had a knack for comforting people." "That's a wonderful idea, Mom. Life goes on, Rachel." "Not the same life, but it goes on." Your father understood that better than anyone. A month after my return, MediRite implemented company-wide changes to emergency leave policies, specifically strengthening protections for bereavement and family medical emergencies. Stephanie sent me the updated policy with a simple note, "Your father's legacy." I printed that email and framed it alongside Dad's photo on my desk, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right creates ripples that extend far beyond your own situation. Brandon, I later heard, had trouble securing another management position after MediRite declined to provide a reference. According to pharmacy gossip, He eventually took a significant step down to assistant manager at a smaller retail chain. As for me, I accepted the lead technician position after some consideration. The role allowed me to advocate for better working conditions while maintaining the patient care that had drawn me to pharmacy work initially. My first official act was organizing a more humane scheduling system that respected people's family obligations and personal time. "This place actually feels functional now," Heather remarked one afternoon as we finished a shift on time for the first time in recent memory. "Remember when we used to stay hours late just to catch up?" "Some things shouldn't require a crisis to change," I replied, thinking of Dad and all he had taught me about standing up for what's right. 3 months after returning to work, I organized a small memorial gathering for Dad with my pharmacy colleagues. None of them had met him, but they'd heard so much about him by then that they felt connected to his story. We planted a tree in the small garden outside the pharmacy break room, a sturdy oak that would, like Dad's legacy, continue growing for generations. As I watched my work family and biological family come together around that sapling, I realized something important. The terrible situation with Brandon had ultimately led to positive change, not just for me, but for everyone at MediRite. Dad would have appreciated that kind of silver lining. He always said, "The measure of a life well lived isn't avoiding storms, Reiki. It's how you rebuild after them." I was still rebuilding, still grieving, still figuring out this new version of life without Dad's physical presence. But I was doing it with strength he had helped instill in me, surrounded by people who genuinely cared, and creating positive change in my small corner of the world. There was a certain peace in that realization, not happiness exactly, but a quiet certainty that I was honoring his memory in the way that would have mattered most to him. 6 months after Dad's death, the seasons had changed, and so had I. Spring brought new growth to the memorial oak outside the pharmacy, its leaves unfurling with promise. My grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from a sharp, constant pain to a gentler ache that visited in waves. "Grief is just love with nowhere to go," Mrs. Henderson had said at one support group meeting. That resonated with me. I'd found that channeling that love into positive action helped make the loss bearable. Work had stabilized into a healthier rhythm under Janet's leadership. The lead pharmacy technician position allowed me to implement changes I'd only dreamed of under Brandon's regime: proper lunch breaks, reasonable scheduling, training programs for new hires. Morale improved dramatically, and surprisingly, so did our performance metrics. Turns out treating employees like actual humans improves productivity, Janet remarked during our monthly review. Who would have thought? One Tuesday morning, Daniel Thompson visited our pharmacy with Catherine Reynolds, the new permanent manager who would be taking over when Janet returned to her district role. Unlike Brandon, Catherine had 15 years of pharmacy experience and a collaborative approach to leadership. "I've heard wonderful things about the changes you've implemented, Rachel," she said during our introduction. "I'm hoping we can continue building on that foundation." After the tour, Thompson asked to speak with me privately. "Rachel, I wanted to personally deliver this," he said, handing me an envelope. "It's a formal letter commending your contributions to MediRite, along with notification of a company-wide policy change that's being called the Mitchell Protocol internally. The protocol established clear guidelines for emergency and bereavement leave, removing operational requirements as a basis for denial, and creating an expedited appeal process directly to district management. My name would be permanently associated with a policy ensuring no one else would experience what I had. Your father would be proud, Thompson said simply. That evening, my coworkers surprised me with a small gathering to celebrate the policy change. Heather had baked her famous chocolate cake, and Tyler had created a card signed by everyone, including several regular customers who'd heard the story. To Rachel, who taught us all to stand up for what matters, Heather toasted, raising her coffee cup. I was touched beyond words. I just did what my dad taught me, I managed to say. He always believed some things are worth fighting for. The following weekend, I flew home to visit Mom. She'd sold the family house, too many memories, too much space for one person, and moved to a sunny apartment near Emma. The grief support group she'd joined had evolved into a close circle of friends who understood her journey. "How are you really doing?" I asked as we sat on her new balcony, watching the sunset. "I still talk to him," she admitted. "Especially when I'm making his favorite pot roast or when the Mets are playing. Sometimes I even think I hear him answer." She smiled softly. "Is that crazy?" "Not at all. I do the same thing." Mom reached for my hand. "He always knew you were the strongest of his children. That's why he worried about you the least." "He worried about me." "Of course he did. That's what parents do." But he'd say, "Our Rachel will land on her feet no matter what. She's got steel in her spine." I hadn't known that. The thought of Dad having such confidence in me brought fresh tears, but they were healing tears. "I miss him every day," Mom continued. "But I'm learning to carry him with me rather than feeling left behind." Does that make sense? It did. That's exactly what I'd been learning to do. Back in Denver, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Stephanie, who had left MediRite for a position at a healthcare advocacy organization. "The Mitchell Protocol is being adopted by several other pharmacy chains," she wrote. "Your stand against injustice is creating ripples throughout the industry. I thought you should know." Small victories. Dad would have appreciated that. When my one-year work anniversary in the lead technician role arrived, Janet and Catherine called me into the office. They offered me a newly created management track position with tuition assistance to complete my pharmacy degree. "We need more leaders who understand both the business and human sides of healthcare," Catherine explained. "Your experience gives you a unique perspective." I accepted, with one condition, that I could structure my training hours around volunteer work with a grief support organization I'd joined. They readily agreed. On the anniversary of Dad's death, I took the day off and visited his grave. Emma and Michael joined me, and we shared memories and laughter alongside our tears. Later, we scattered some of his ashes in the lake where he'd taught us all to fish, where he'd once jumped in with his boots on to save me. "Remember what Dad always said about setbacks?" Michael asked as we watched the sunset over the water. "It's not about avoiding the storm," Emma and I recited together. "It's about how you rebuild afterward." Standing there with my siblings, I realized that's exactly what we'd all been doing, rebuilding. Not the same lives we'd had before, but new ones that honored Dad's memory through how we lived. Back at work, I placed a small framed photo of Dad on my desk. Not the formal one from his obituary, but one of him laughing at a family barbecue, spatula in hand, eyes crinkling with joy. Sometimes when facing a difficult decision, I'd glance at that photo and ask myself, what would Dad advise? The answer was usually clear. The Mitchell Protocol became my legacy to him, a small but meaningful change that protected other families during their most vulnerable moments. It didn't bring Dad back, but it gave purpose to the pain we'd experienced. Loss changes you. That's inevitable. But Dad had taught me through his life, and even through his death, that we can choose how it changes us. We can become bitter or better, closed or more compassionate, fearful or more authentic. I chose to become more fully the person Dad had always seen in me, someone with steel in her spine and compassion in her heart. Someone who stands up for what matters, who rebuilds after the storm. Sometimes I still talk to him, especially during difficult moments or beautiful sunsets. And sometimes, in the quiet spaces between thoughts, I could swear I hear him answer, "You've got this. Reiki. You always did." Have you ever had to choose between work and family during a crisis? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you or reminded you of someone special in your life, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more. Remember to share with anyone who might be struggling with workplace challenges or grief. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our experiences makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, in the end, it's not the hours we put in at work that define us, but the love we share with those who matter most.